Welcome to the Shadows of Fear channel. Now I will guide you through a world of darkness, witches, and unknown creatures. I hope this helps you disconnect from the daily routine and relax. To keep any visual distractions away, we will leave the screen black and let your imagination take flight. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your country. And now we begin. Why does the sound of rain feel so different when you're alone? As if the entire world stops just to listen. Or maybe it's me, the one who stops to listen. A sound so simple, so ordinary, yet now it has become something else, something I can't get out of my head. Each drop that falls against the glass reminds me of something I don't want to remember. The sound of water won't let me sleep. I've stopped counting the nights, but not the hours. The raindrops, relentless, slide slowly down my window. The sky seems to be pouring its sorrow onto the earth. The rain is the only thing that makes sense in this world, where I find myself trapped. My apartment is small, dark, its walls covered in books and broken memories. In the background, the only sound I hear, besides the rain, is my own breathing, growing harder to ignore. Every time I try to push these thoughts away, something inside me won't let go. I can't stop thinking about what happened. I wonder if this is real, if any of this is real. Has rain always been like this, or is it me who has changed? I wish I could say this is all normal, that rain is just rain, and my thoughts are just thoughts. But something about the way the water falls, something in that soft rhythm, makes me believe otherwise. The first drops fell hours ago, or maybe only minutes. Time has lost meaning. But what I do know is that there's something strange in the air, a weight I can't shake off, as if the rain is pushing something toward me, something I can't see but can feel lurking. The apartment is dark. Barely any light filters through the damp curtains. In the corner of the room, the shadows seem denser, heavier. I don't know if it's just the dim light or if something is truly there, hiding in the darkness. But I can't stop looking. Something moves. I'm not sure if I'm imagining it or if it's real, but the shadows stretch and twist. They look like dark fingers, reaching for me, as if they were alive. I try not to think about it. I take a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The rain keeps falling, like a sorrowful song, and the heavy, humid air presses against my chest. But I can't ignore it. The feeling that something is there, just beyond my sight, makes me feel trapped. I don't know if the sound of the rain is driving me mad, or if something is truly moving in the shadows. Every time I close my eyes, the sensation intensifies. The rain never stops falling, and with it, my fear keeps growing. The droplets continue their descent, but they don't sound the same anymore. Now they seem to follow a distinct rhythm, as if trying to tell me something, a hidden message within the storm's song. But I don't know what it is. I wonder if I'm imagining things. Maybe this is just another trick of my mind. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that there's something else, something unseen, watching me. The night fog seems to wrap around me, and every time I try to move, the rain grows stronger, more insidious. Could it be that the rain is the only witness to what's happening inside my mind? My pulse quickens. Every drop that falls feels like it's striking me. Every flicker of light seems to reveal more than just the outside world. The shadow in the corner looks closer, larger, as if it's creeping toward me. But when I look straight at it, there's nothing. Nothing but the weight of darkness and the relentless rain. I feel fear taking hold of me, twisting reality and fantasy together. Is this a nightmare or simply an uncomfortable truth I refuse to accept? I wonder if I should get up, if I should look through the window and see if something is really out there. But the moment I consider it, the sensation of being watched intensifies. Then I hear a whisper, faint but unmistakable, a sound almost as soft as the rain itself, yet carrying a tone that does not belong to this world. My body tenses. The shadow in the corner moves again, but now I'm no longer sure if it's the shadow shifting or if I am the one losing control. I don't dare look directly at that corner. The feeling of being watched is unbearable. The sound of the rain remains the only thing I can hear. But the rain no longer feels like just rain. It's something more. And as the shadows continue to stretch, my mind begins to wonder if what lurks inside me is about to surface. Every shadow, every flicker in the corner of my vision makes me question whether what I saw was truly a hallucination. I step away from the window, feeling my legs tremble under the weight of fear. The sensation of being watched hasn't faded. If anything, it has grown stronger, wrapping around me like a dense fog I can't escape. The clock in the living room chimes with an unexpected hollow strike, making my entire body tense. My eyes snap to the clock's hands. It is exactly midnight, yet something feels wrong. Time appears to have frozen, as if this moment exists outside of it, or as if the clock holds no power over this place. Suddenly I hear it again. A whisper so faint it could have been my imagination. But this time, the feeling that something is behind me is undeniable. I can't turn around. I can't stop moving forward, as if an unseen force is pushing me ahead. I don't know if my feet obey me, or if my mind is guiding my body on its own. But I reach the doorway to the living room, almost hypnotized by the overwhelming sense that I am not alone. The room is completely silent, except for the rain still falling outside. I step cautiously toward the center of the space. Every movement is deliberate, a conscious effort. The floor creaks beneath my feet, and the sound echoes through the empty room. The dim light flickers briefly, and at that moment, a gust of wind slips through the crack in the window. The light wavers again, and I freeze. The room is shifting before my eyes. It's as if the walls are breathing, expanding and contracting with each breath I take. Every shadow seems to have a life of its own, and the smallest imperfections on the walls twist into distorted figures, watching me. A frozen chill seizes my body, and I feel the air around me grow heavier. That's when I see it. A figure stands at the far end of the room, motionless as if it had been there all along. It doesn't move, but its eyes are fixed on me, or at least, that's what I think. Its silhouette is blurred, yet the pressure in my chest intensifies as I try to focus my vision. The figure is too still, too perfect. What are you? I whisper, my voice breaking in the darkness. I don't know why I ask. I know there will be no answer. I know this moment makes no sense, but something in my mind forces me to speak, as if doing so could shatter this trance. The figure remains unmoving, yet a deeper cold seeps into my bones. The air thickens, becoming almost unbreathable. I try to step back, but my legs refuse to obey. My mind is frozen, paralyzed by fear, by helplessness, by the sight of that presence lingering there, so close yet so impossibly distant. Every second stretches, as if time itself is unraveling. And then, as I try to tear my gaze away, I see something worse. There are more figures in the room. In the corners, the shadows have gathered, taking on shapes I can't comprehend. They are all watching me, and I know, with absolute certainty, that there is no escape. My breathing quickens. I begin to realize that this place is not real, or it is, but something about it has changed. Something has twisted its very essence, and now the shadows and the figures have taken over. Are these entities a creation of my own mind? Or am I trapped between worlds in some kind of purgatory? My thoughts refuse to make sense of it. I only know that something is wrong. Very wrong. With an almost physical effort, I manage to take a step back, then another. The pressure in my chest tightens, my vision blurs. The figure in the center of the room begins to move, gliding toward me without shifting a single part of its body. Every step it takes echoes inside my skull, reverberating through the walls of the room. I try to run, but my feet are heavy, as if the ground itself is holding me in place. I search for an escape. Something stops me. The door that had been open is now shut tight. My hand trembles as I try to turn the knob, but it won't budge. There's something in the air, something that won't let me leave. Something holding me here. A scream catches in my throat, and when I turn back, the figure is already behind me. The darkness swallows me whole, and then everything goes black. I wake up on the floor, my face damp with something more than just rain. The light flickers weakly in the corner of the room, but this time there are no figures, no shadows watching me. Yet the feeling that something is deeply wrong lingers, like a fog creeping into my mind. My body is shaking, but not from the cold. I don't know if I was asleep or if I simply collapsed from fear. The last image in my mind is that figure coming toward me. I can still feel the echo of its presence in every corner of the room. I try to stand. My legs feel heavy, unresponsive. The air remains thick, and though the sound of the rain is the only thing I can hear, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone. Was it all just an illusion? A dream? Logic tells me it must have been, that it was nothing more than a trick of my unsettled mind. But a small part of me, the part that no longer trusts reason, tells me that what I saw was real. As real as the cold still lodged deep in my bones. I close my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The darkness feels different now, as if time itself has stopped and my mind is trapped in some kind of loop. Forcing myself to open my eyes, I scan the room cautiously. Everything seems normal, too normal. The furniture, the walls, the floor, everything is in its place. And yet, the air remains thick, heavy, as if something unseen lingers just out of sight, watching. With effort, I take a few steps toward the window. The rain still falls gently, and for a moment, I allow myself to believe that everything might be fine, that there's nothing out of the ordinary here. But as I look closer, I realize something unsettling. The street outside is empty. No cars, no people, no signs of life. It's as if everything has vanished, as if the world outside has ceased to exist. There is only me, trapped in this place without time, without escape. A sudden knock against the window makes me jump back. I step closer cautiously, my hand trembling as I press it against the glass. It's cold to the touch, colder than it should be. And then, through the rain, I see something that makes my heart stop. A figure in the reflection. A shadowy shape, blurred but unmistakably there. I don't have the courage to turn around, to face it directly, but I know it's close, too close. The feeling of being watched intensifies, creeping into my skin like a whisper that I can't quite hear. A soft sound reaches my ear, faint, almost imperceptible. I can't make out the words, but the tone burrows into my bones, vibrating through me. I want to run, I want to scream, but something keeps me frozen. My body still won't respond the way it should. The door is still shut. No matter how hard I try, it won't open. There's no way out, no escape. Every time I glance at the window, I see something more, something I can't fully grasp, but I know it's there, waiting. My mind begins to slip. The dread in my chest grows heavier, and the room around me warps. The furniture, the walls, the air itself, everything twists into shapes I can't understand. I sink to my knees, covering my head. There is something here, something far beyond my comprehension. An icy chill crawls down my spine. The figure in the window moves, just slightly, a shift, a glide, as if it doesn't walk but floats. The reflection lingers, closer now. It forces me to turn, to look at what I don't want to see. And when I do, the figure is right behind me. The shadow stands in the doorway, creeping toward me. But this time, it's not blurred. It's not distorted by the reflection. It's solid, tangible. A strangled scream rises in my throat, but no sound escapes. The air is so thick that my lungs seem unable to function properly. Every time I try to take a deep breath, the air grows denser, as if I'm drowning in this tainted atmosphere. The figure moves toward me, and as it does, something inside me breaks. My mind, unable to comprehend what is happening, unravels. All I can do is watch as that shadow approaches, as its empty eyes pierce through me, reaching the deepest part of my being. It feels as if it is stripping something away from me, as if it is taking the last spark of humanity left within me. The sound of the rain fades, replaced by something far worse, the whispering of 1,000 voices speaking at once, distorted and distant, yet so close as if they were inside my head. And then, laughter. Low, guttural laughter that echoes in my ears and embeds itself in my mind. I collapse to the floor, unable to stand, and when I look up, the figure is over me. A scream finally escapes my throat, but I don't know if it's real, if it's mine, or if I am no longer myself. The room darkens further, and the last thing I see before I black out is a smile that does not belong to any human. I wake up in an empty space, but the air is heavy, weighed down by an invisible force pressing against my chest. The floor is cold, but not like the floor of the real world. It feels more like the reflection of cold, as if the environment surrounding me isn't entirely real. I open my eyes slowly, with great difficulty, as if the effort alone is an overwhelming task. The flickering light in the corner is gone. Everything is dark. But it is a strange darkness, dense, like a shroud wrapped around my thoughts. I feel disoriented, as if I've just woken from a long sleep, but can't remember when I began sleeping or why. My body is numb. My hands feel cold and heavy. I try to move, but the pain coursing through my muscles stops me. The overwhelming sensation of having been at the mercy of something far greater, something beyond human comprehension, takes hold of me. I inhale and something in the air shifts. The humidity thickens, as if I were underwater. Everything around me remains still, yet at the same time, it doesn't. Something moves within the shadows. I catch glimpses of it at the edge of my vision, but I can't see it clearly. It's as if the shifting of the darkness is a trick, a deception. Suddenly, I feel watched, as though thousands of unseen eyes are locked onto me, judging me. I try to steady myself, but my mind is flooded with fragmented images. I remember that figure in the doorway, that dark presence watching me. My heart pounds, faster than it should. I have the sinking feeling that if I don't understand what's happening, if I don't act soon, I will lose my sanity entirely. But my thoughts scatter, disconnected, as if my brain is desperately searching for something to make sense of all this. And then I hear it. A sound, soft at first, almost imperceptible. A step, maybe two, dragging in the distance. The sound is familiar, too familiar. My mind struggles to rationalize it, to identify it, but the more I try to think clearly, the louder it becomes. A creak, followed by a scrape, a ragged breath. I try to move. I can't stay here, I need to move, but my legs won't respond. It's as if the very ground is holding me in place. A silence falls over the space, a silence so deep it hurts. And in the midst of that silence, I hear it. A voice. It is not human. It is not a voice I recognize, but it is clear and sharp. You cannot escape. The words repeat, echoing in my head like an endless refrain. Fear paralyzes me. There is no way out. I only know that this voice holds power. It is playing with me. My breathing quickens. My hands clutch the floor in desperation. I feel the sweat running down my neck, the pressure in my chest increasing with every second, as if an invisible weight is crushing me. The room, the space that should feel familiar, begins to distort. The walls seem to stretch and contract in an impossible rhythm. The ceiling sinks toward me as if the air itself is being compressed, growing denser, heavier. I look around for an escape, but there is none. Everything starts to fade. The furniture, the shadows, even the sound of the rain. Everything dissolves into the darkness as if it had never existed. The figure, that shadow, it appears again. This time closer, much closer. The presence moves slowly, and every step it takes resonates in my chest like the echo of my own heartbeat. I saw you, the voice says, louder this time. I know what you did. I cannot move. I cannot react. Terror takes hold of me. My mind screams that I must do something, that I must react, but all I can do is remain there, paralyzed, watching as the figure approaches. What you saw, what you did, you will never forget it, it whispers. You will never leave. Time stretches, distorts, and my mind is on the verge of shattering. It feels as if I am disintegrating from the inside out. Every word the figure speaks is a hammer striking my consciousness. Every sentence is a sentence. My eyes close, and when I open them, everything has changed. The figure is gone. The light flickers once more. The air is light again, but something inside me has changed. The fear lingers. The paranoia remains. And worst of all, the feeling that something is still watching me, waiting. And now I know with certainty that I will never truly know if all of this is real or just the reflection of my broken mind. I must face the only truth that remains. There is no way out. This could have happened in reality. Leave your comment, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a like. Our journey continues. The city seemed quiet that night. The rain fell softly, like a distant murmur barely touching the pavement. But it wasn't. Something was different, as if the night itself was breathing, as if everything around it was waiting. And I, as always, found myself in the middle of that emptiness, caught between the need to escape and the temptation to keep going. Keep going. Keep going. I lived in a neighborhood I knew well. The dark streets didn't scare me. In fact, I found them comforting. The dim, flickering streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalks. Everything was in its place, or so I thought. There was something in the air, something I couldn't quite identify. A faint scent of damp earth, but with something else, something strange, unusual. I didn't know what it was. I could only feel that pressure, as if the very air around me was thickening. I tried to ignore it. I walked home with my head down, unwilling to look to the sides. My apartment was on the top floor of an old brick building. I had always liked that place. The view from the window gave me a sense of age that oddly calmed me. But that night, as I reached the hallway of my building, something stopped me. The hallway was darker than usual, as if the ceiling light had dimmed more than it should. I looked down and saw something I couldn't understand. On the floor, right in front of my apartment door, there were marks, subtle enough to go unnoticed at first glance, but when I crouched down, I could see them clearly. They were footprints, but not human. Not the kind left by someone who had just walked through. They were deep, as if something heavy had dragged itself slowly, leaving behind a trail of damp, disordered earth. The pattern was irregular. Some tracks overlapped, others faded away. And worst of all, that strange smell I had noticed before had intensified. It's impossible, I thought. What kind of thing could have left those marks? I'm just tired, I told myself. It's just a dream, nothing more. But deep in my mind, a knot began to form. I quickly entered my apartment, shutting the door behind me with a firm, sharp sound. I didn't want to think about it anymore, even though a growing sense of unease crept into my nerves. Everything seemed normal. The shadows from the windows partially covered the living room, and the ticking of the wall clock kept a steady rhythm I usually found familiar. But that night, that ticking sounded louder, almost as if it was trying to tell me something. I tried to ignore it and, as always, sat at my desk to go through some papers. However, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. Then suddenly, a sound interrupted my thoughts. A faint scraping, like something dragging along the floor. I stood up quickly, looked toward the hallway, but I saw nothing. Nothing. I sat back down, convinced it was just my imagination. But the sound persisted, louder, closer. My breath became erratic. I looked around, searching for something that would make sense, but there was nothing. Nothing out of place. Everything was where it should be, but the atmosphere felt thick, as if the night was being lived in a deeper, more unfamiliar way than ever before. It's just the wind, I told myself. But the footprints, who had left them? The sound didn't stop. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the house was old, and some pipe or structure simply gave way to the cold. But no, the scraping continued, now clearer, as if something or someone was dragging itself along the hallway, moving slowly, without haste, with no visible purpose. Closer and closer. My body tensed. Logic told me I should stay there, wait, try to rationalize what was happening. But something in my stomach told me I had to act. I walked slowly toward the hallway, my steps carefully muffled by the parquet floor. My heart pounded in my ears. I could feel the age of the air, that heaviness that always comes before a storm. Though it wasn't raining anymore, the darkness surrounded me like a cloak that refused to let go. When I reached the corner where the hallway ended and the door to my apartment stood, I stopped. I saw something that paralyzed me. More footprints. But these were not like the previous ones. They were clearer, more defined. They seemed fresher. And now, something even more disturbing. The floor was marked by soft lines, almost like scratches, stretching across the wall, reaching the door of my home. "This can't be happening," I murmured to myself. But the fear was choking me. I couldn't stop looking at those tracks, those marks that stretched, dragging across the walls, disappearing into the darkness. Something was there, in my home. Something that didn't belong in this world. Something I had never seen before, but somehow recognized. It was a strange sensation, as if that presence had been waiting in the shadows all along, watching, waiting for the exact moment to manifest. Suddenly, a loud crash, as if something heavy had fallen onto the hallway floor, made me jump back. My body reacted without thinking, running to the door to close it. But before I could reach it, something stopped me. The apartment door was already open. Something or someone had been inside. An icy chill ran down my spine. There were no signs of a struggle or disorder, but the feeling was palpable, as if the air was charged with electricity. I cautiously peered into the darkness surrounding the room. Nothing. No noise, only the shallow breath coming from my lips. And then I saw it, a faint flicker of light coming from the darkest corner of the apartment. I slowly approached, not daring to make a sound, but my feet barely touched the floor. I felt like a spectator trapped in a nightmare I couldn't control. It was a barely visible figure fading in and out of the shadows. At first, I thought it might be a reflection, a hallucination, but the air was growing denser, as if the figure itself was absorbing the very light. I moved closer, fearful yet driven by something inside me urging me to discover what it was. My breath quickened as I realized something even stranger. The figure wasn't just there, but the footprints I had seen earlier in the hallway seemed to follow it. And the most terrifying part, those footprints didn't stop on the ground. They continued in the air, as if something invisible was dragging the figure. The murmurs in my head grew louder, like voices whispering incomprehensible words. I couldn't tell if they were my own thoughts or something else, something that was calling to me, pulling me in. "What is that?" I asked myself, but the answer never came. Suddenly, the figure faded. In its place was an absolute void, a feeling of loss, as if something essential had ceased to exist. And then, a muffled scream, like the echo of a lost soul, rose from the depths of the apartment. A scream that came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Time seemed to stop. My legs no longer responded. Fear took over, leaving only room for a single question that echoed in my head. What the hell is happening here? My mind could no longer keep pace with what I was seeing. There was no logic, no answers, only the echo of that scream that seemed to rise from an unknown place. Without knowing how, I began to walk toward the door. But I couldn't take my eyes off the darkness that slid through the apartment, searching for something, searching for someone. And I didn't know if I would be the next one. Each step I took pulled me farther from the dark corner where I had seen that figure. My eyes kept searching, watching every shadow, but the room seemed empty now, although the air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't identify. It was as if the space itself had changed, as if the place no longer belonged to the reality I knew. The walls, once familiar, now seemed to slowly close in, pressing. The door I had left open just moments before was now shut without any explanation. There was no sound when I moved it, only the quickened pace of my steps, feeling my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out any other sound, any other thought. There was no time to rationalize what was happening. I couldn't think, I just ran. But my feet didn't seem to move the way they should. It was as if the ground was stretching, making every step feel like an eternity. The pressure in my chest grew. The air became denser, and a cold sweat ran down my forehead. Something was wrong, very wrong. When I reached the living room, the light flickered. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. I saw it. The figure hadn't left. It was there in the threshold, barely visible. But this time it wasn't just a silhouette. There was something more. Something that shouldn't be there. The darkness had compacted around it, as if it was taking control of it, of me. I froze. I couldn't move. My eyes couldn't stop looking at the figure, which didn't seem human. Something between shadow and flesh, something I had never seen. But there was something in its eyes, or rather in what were supposed to be eyes, that kept me trapped. They weren't normal eyes. They were empty, deep, and seemed to be staring into every corner of my soul. Then it began to move, but not normally. It slid. It floated. Every movement it made disassembled the reality around me. The walls trembled. The objects in the room slid to one side, as if gravity were being altered by that entity. The clocks, the paintings, the chairs, everything began to move silently, as if the world was losing its shape. I forced myself to take a step back, but my body didn't respond as I wanted. It was as if an invisible force was pushing me toward the center of the room, toward the figure that was still there, getting closer, denser. The air began to grow colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. The strange crackling noise was no longer just a distant echo. Now it seemed to come from within me, as if my own body was about to break apart. Suddenly, the figure stopped moving. It was too close. Both of our breathing was ragged. Something happened, a sound, a whisper that didn't come from the figure. A whisper I felt in my mind, as if it were thinking my thoughts before I thought them. Something that said, with a terrifying calmness, "You're here, but you can't stay." The air seemed to thicken, as if the walls were beginning to close in to devour everything in their path. Then I heard something different, a low and deep noise that resonated from the back of the room. I turned quickly and saw it on the wall, where there had only been an old painting before. Now there was a crack. The crack spread, and within it there was a faint light that didn't come from any visible source, a light that seemed to come from another world. The figure didn't move, but its eyes looked at me once again, and I understood the worst. I wasn't alone. It wasn't there just to scare me. It was here to take everything, to erase what was real and replace it with something much worse. My mind could no longer process it. I ran toward the door with all my strength and managed to open it, but what I saw outside stopped me. The street was different, deeper. The streetlights flickered irregularly, and the air was thick with a damp, suffocating smell. The city, my city, seemed emptier than ever, as if the figure that had been in my house had left a mark on everything. A rumble, like a modified whisper, echoed in my head. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. No one. But something was following me. Something that no longer belonged to the world I had lived in until now. My body remained frozen, but something inside me kept running, searching for an escape, searching for answers. What had happened that night? Was it all a nightmare? Or had something much darker been unleashed? The only certainty was that something had started that night, something I couldn't comprehend. As I walked down the street, my mind tried to find a logical explanation for what had just happened, but there was no coherent answer, no justification for the horrors I had witnessed. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was growing thicker, more charged. The city, which I had known so well until recently, now felt alien, strange, and terrifying. The streetlights flickered, struggling to stay on in a night where time seemed to have stopped. I couldn't stop looking back, expecting to see that figure, but there was nothing. Still, the unease persisted. Something was watching me, something I couldn't see, but that I felt in every fiber of my being. A low sound, like the whisper of the wind but closer, echoed through the empty streets. I ventured deeper into the neighborhood, looking for somewhere safe, something that could offer a sense of normalcy, but everything seemed altered. The houses that had once been familiar now appeared darker, their windows opaque and empty, as if no one lived there. The shadows stretched unnervingly, as if the walls themselves were warping before my eyes. Each step became slower, heavier. Suddenly, a noise echoed in the street, a creaking, the sound of something sliding. I couldn't help but turn. It was a figure, and this time it wasn't just a shadow. It was more tangible, more defined. It was at the end of the street, right where there had only been darkness before. Fear took hold of me. My legs trembled, but I couldn't stand still. Every movement of that figure paralyzed me further, as if my body had lost control. I was breathing heavily, but as I got closer, something inside me told me I had to see what it was, even though I didn't want to know. The figure began to move toward me silently, floating more than walking. And then I saw it. I understood. It was the same figure that had been in my house, but something had changed. Its shape was clearer, more defined, as if it had stopped being a shadow and become something completely real. Its face, if it could be called a face, had no human features. It was a smooth surface, without eyes or mouth, but I felt like it was watching me somehow, as if its presence was penetrating my mind, deep into my soul. The fear didn't come just from its appearance, but from the sensation that something was crawling inside me. An anxiety, a panic I couldn't identify, but that was overwhelming me. The figure moved slowly, but its presence forced me to stop. I couldn't escape. I couldn't move. The silence was absolute, but the pressure in the air was so intense that I felt like I was about to explode. Every breath felt like a burden, as if the air itself was saturated with dark energy. Then something inside me reacted. Something that wasn't rational, something primal. I started running without knowing exactly where to, but I felt I had to get away. My footsteps echoed in the deserted street, but I still couldn't stop looking back, afraid that the thing was close, following me. I ran until my legs couldn't go any further, until the air ran out. I stopped, panting, searching for shelter, but there was nothing. The fear had stopped being something physical. It had become a presence surrounding me, trapping me. I wasn't alone. Something had changed in the city, and I no longer knew if what I was experiencing was real or if my mind was breaking under the weight of something much bigger. But one thing was certain, something was there, and it wasn't planning on leaving. I looked up at the sky, searching for any sign of normality, but the clouds were dark, dense, as if they were watching. Something was about to happen, and my only hope was that I could escape before it did. But I knew it was too late. I was exhausted, but fear kept me on my feet. No matter how fatigued I was, every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee, but I didn't know where to go. What was the point of running when the very shadows seemed to be against me, following every one of my movements? The city was no longer the same. Its streets, which had once been familiar, now felt like a dark labyrinth with no way out. I looked back, expecting to see the figure that had been chasing me, but this time the silence was absolute. There was nothing. The air felt denser, colder, as if an invisible veil had covered everything around me. The pressure in my chest intensified. I was losing control, and I didn't know how to stop it. I walked into a narrow alley, searching for some kind of refuge. It was a secluded place where the city lights barely managed to illuminate the cobbled ground. The darkness was deep, almost palpable. The feeling of being watched became unbearable, as if the walls themselves were paying attention to every move I made. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A barely perceptible whisper, but unmistakable, as if someone were whispering my name. My heart skipped a beat. I turned quickly but saw nothing. The street was empty, as if no one else existed in the world. Was my mind playing tricks on me? I wasn't sure. The whisper came again, this time clearer. Go, it's too late. My legs began to tremble uncontrollably, and the feeling of terror overwhelmed me. Who was speaking? Was it the same figure that had been chasing me? Fear mixed with confusion, and my breathing became erratic. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm myself, but when I opened them again, the figure was there. It was no longer a blurry shadow. It was clearly in front of me, defying all logic. It was a human shape, but something was deeply wrong with it. Its eyes were not human eyes. They were empty, dark, like infinite pits of darkness that seemed to absorb all the light around them. Terror paralyzed me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Every part of my body was frozen, as if the very existence of this thing had altered the natural laws. The figure began to move slowly, as if savoring the fear emanating from me. My mind tried to find a solution, but all I could think about was how to escape this horror that seemed endless. "Don't come closer," I whispered, even though I knew my words were useless. "Don't come closer, please." But the figure didn't stop. It was too close now, and something inside me knew it wasn't just a physical threat. It was something much deeper. It was the embodiment of all my fears, all my insecurities. What I had seen in those dark streets was not just a creature. It was a manifestation of my own terror, a monster born from nothing, fed by anxiety and paranoia. The figure stretched a hand toward me, and at that moment, the air grew even thicker. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mind was fading, absorbed by the darkness emanating from that entity. The city was no longer a place I recognized. It had become a labyrinth of nightmares, a prison from which I couldn't escape. In one last desperate attempt, I took a step back, but I tripped, fell to the ground, feeling the cold consume my body. The figure was over me, its empty face staring at mine while its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with a terrifying intensity. "It's done," it whispered once more, and then everything faded away. I don't know if I fainted or if I simply lost consciousness, but when I woke up, I was alone. The figure had disappeared. The streets were empty, as if nothing had happened. I got up, trembling, unsure if what I had experienced was real or if it had all been an illusion. The only thing I knew for sure was that something had changed in me. The city was no longer a safe place. The echo of that figure still resonated in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something much worse was about to come. Was this just the beginning, or was it already too late to escape? The only thing I knew for certain was that I would never look at the night the same way again. I never understood why something as simple as a renovation in my house affected me so much. When I bought the house, the idea was to change my surroundings, start fresh in a peaceful place, far from everything that had tormented me in recent years. I never imagined that this space, which I thought would be my refuge, would drag me into a darker place than I had ever experienced. It all started one Tuesday afternoon when I decided to renovate the living room floor. It had been too long since I moved in, and although I already felt comfortable, I sensed that my surroundings weren't truly reflecting the peace I was seeking. There was something in the walls, in the corners, in the air itself, that wouldn't let me rest. At first, everything was quite normal. Removing the old wooden floor didn't seem like a big challenge, but when I lifted one of the planks, I noticed something strange. A hollow, a small space under the floor, as if it were a hidden room. It wasn't on the house's plans, nor in the memories of the previous owners. Just a dark and deep void that seemed to whisper through the moisture and accumulated dust. In that moment, I felt intrigued. Who would do something like this? Why hide a room beneath the floor? I stopped working on the project for a moment and lowered my flashlight to the hole. What I saw took my breath away. On an old wooden table covered in cobwebs, there was a series of objects I couldn't identify. They weren't ordinary antiques. There were small ceramic figures, strange amulets, and the most unsettling, a closed iron box secured with a chain. Something about its appearance chilled my blood. I couldn't say why, but there was something about those objects that made me feel like I shouldn't touch them, as if they were waiting for me to do so. The feeling of discomfort grew every time I looked into the hole. There was something behind the box, something more that wasn't visible, something watching me from the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more there, something I wasn't supposed to uncover. As I kept staring at the objects, I realized there was a small door, almost hidden in one of the walls of the hole. It was so small I could barely see it, but it was there, a patch of broken wood that revealed an even darker space. Why had no one mentioned this to me? Why had no one said there was something beneath the floor? The tension grew. My body was tense, my breathing growing heavier. I felt pressure on my chest, as if an invisible hand was crushing me. I decided to close the hole and continue with the work, but at that moment, a strange sound stopped me. A creak followed by a faint whisper that seemed to come from inside that small door. "Leave. Leave now," I clearly heard. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. The voice wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient, something that belonged to another time, another place. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to calm my mind, but when I opened them again, the door was slightly ajar, and the room seemed to extend beyond what I had seen. I felt dizzy, confused. Something wasn't right. The feeling of being watched invaded me again, stronger than ever. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps, barely perceptible, but unmistakable, as if someone were approaching from the deepest darkness. I turned quickly, but there was no one. A cold sweat covered my forehead. I knew I had to get out of there. I had to leave that house, but an invisible force kept me in place. Something inside me told me I had to discover what was under that wood, yet something in my gut urged me not to do it. What I saw next changed my life forever, but that is another story. I couldn't sleep that night. The house, which once felt cozy, now seemed like a strange, dark, and claustrophobic place. Every creak of the floor, every faint sound coming from the walls, made my muscles tense. My eyes scanned the room, searching for something I couldn't see but felt was there, watching me. The air seemed thick, as if something floated in it, waiting for me to get too close. The memory of the slightly open door beneath the floor, that small crack revealing an even deeper room, kept tormenting me. What was down there? What was it that had spoken to me in that voice that wasn't human? Every time I tried to rationalize the situation, something inside me told me I shouldn't keep seeking answers, but curiosity, that curiosity, consumed me. The next day, I decided I had to find out more. I couldn't leave that door open. That constant unease was driving me crazy. But before descending back into the basement, I decided to walk through the rest of the house to calm my mind. However, Everything in the home seemed different. The silence was heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for me to do something. I went to the kitchen, but the ceiling light flickered strangely, blinking in irregular intervals, as though it had a life of its own. The air felt cold, colder than usual, even with the heating on. When I turned toward the hallway, I saw something that made me stop. A shadow of something or someone moving in the doorway of the living room. There was no one there when I looked, but the shadow remained, stagnant, as if it were taking its time to disappear. I decided to disregard what I had just seen. I had been working on the house for so long that fatigue must have been affecting my mind. But as I approached the hallway, a wave of extreme fear enveloped me again, and when I looked toward the wall, I saw something that froze my blood. Footprints. They weren't like the normal tracks left from walking on wet ground. They were darker, as if made from something thick and sticky. And they seemed to drag from the door into the hallway. My heart raced. I crouched down slowly to examine them more closely, but the moment I got closer, the sound of a dull thud echoed from the basement, the same thud I had heard the previous night just before hearing the voice. My stomach churned, and fear took hold of me. I ran to the basement. I needed to see what was beyond that door. I needed to know if what I had experienced was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. When I reached the basement entrance, I felt a pressure in the air, as if something was waiting for me in the darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and descended slowly, the sound of my own footsteps echoing off the stairwell walls, creating strange reverberations I couldn't identify. My breathing was deep, my mind trying to push away the dark thoughts, but fear continued to grow with every step I took. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in front of the door crack. It was open wider than I had left it, and I could see something strange inside that secret room. A blurry figure in the dimness moving slowly toward me. I couldn't make out what it was, but its presence chilled me to the bone. It was a shadow that had no shape but a terrifying clarity. I could feel I wasn't alone. "Boo, who's there?" I asked with a trembling voice, though I knew I wouldn't get an answer. But something inside me urged me to keep speaking, to challenge the presence that seemed as tangible as the air I was breathing. Then I heard the reply. "Leave," said a whispering, raspy voice, as if it had been dragged through centuries of silence. No, it must not know the truth. The words came like a frozen wave, and my body froze. I couldn't move, fear overtook my mind, but there was something more, something inside me that forced me to move forward. I couldn't go back. I couldn't stop searching, and when I took a step forward, everything went dark. When everything went dark, my first impulse was to step back, but something inside me kept me anchored to that space, as if an invisible force was pushing me forward. My legs were trembling, and the flashlight in my hand seemed insufficient to dispel the darkness that had taken over the place. The light flickered, weakly blinking, as if the very energy was on the verge of fading away. The air grew denser, heavier. I could feel it on my skin with every breath I took. The whispering voice I had heard earlier echoed in my head like a sound that wouldn't fade away. "Leave. You must not know the truth." But that warning only fueled my curiosity. What was it that awaited me in that hidden room? What truth was I not supposed to know? Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, it was like a shadow, an indistinct shape, but as it came closer, it began to take form. It was tall, very tall, and its presence was oppressive. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching me. Every step it took was followed by a creak of wood, a sound that seemed much louder than it really was, resonating in the house's hallways like a warning of something imminent. "Who are you?" I asked, though I knew it was futile. Why was I asking? What did I expect to gain from an entity that clearly didn't want to be understood? Yet, My voice came out weak but defiant. The figure stopped in front of me. Its eyes, though hidden in the darkness, glowed with an unnatural light, as if they had fused with the very shadow. Then it started to speak, but it wasn't a human voice. It was more like a whisper coming from everywhere, from the walls, the floor, the very air. "You're not the first to search. You won't be the last," said the voice, slowly dragging itself as if the words themselves were sliding across the surface of my mind. Fear overtook me completely, and a chill ran down my spine. My thoughts became confused, distorted, as if I were trapped in a dream from which I couldn't wake. My head began to spin, and the figure before me kept moving forward relentlessly, one step after another. "This is not what it seems," the voice murmured. "This place, this house, there are secrets beneath every layer of its floor. Every layer you lift, the closer you are to revealing what should not be revealed." My legs, which had once trembled with fear, now felt like they were made of lead. I tried to take a step back, but something held me in place. It was as if the space that had once seemed familiar had transformed into a prison. The basement, which had once been just a dark, dusty place, was now a labyrinth of living shadows, a place where logic and reason had no place. Suddenly, the flashlight in my hand went out. Absolute darkness surrounded me, and the figure in front of me ceased to be just a shadow. It began to move, gliding toward me, as if the light didn't touch it, as if it were part of the darkness itself. My breathing became more erratic. My mind tried to find a way out and escape, but there was none. The shadow began to take a more defined shape, a human figure, though distorted. Its body was elongated, unnatural, with limbs stretching beyond what was possible. Its face remained a shapeless mass of shadows, but something in its presence told me it was staring at me, as if it were analyzing me. I couldn't help it. A scream erupted from my throat, a scream of pure terror, of desperation. But at that moment, everything stopped. The figure froze, and the pressure in the air disappeared, as if time itself had halted for an instant. "Do whatever you want," the voice said, and this time, instead of whispering, it sounded clear, filled with an unsettling serenity. "But remember, you won't be able to escape the past. It always returns." In that moment, a booming sound like a sharp thud echoed in the darkness. I didn't know if it came from the figure, from the house, or from my own mind, but when I looked back at the place where the figure had been, it was no longer there. Cold sweat ran down my forehead. I felt as if everything was spinning around me. What had just happened? Had I really seen something? Or perhaps it was just my mind playing tricks on me? But there was something inside me, something dark and persistent, that told me not everything was right. I staggered back, my heart pounding. I didn't know whether I should go further down or if the door I had just opened should be left closed forever. But deep within me, I knew I couldn't let it go. There was something else, something much bigger than this place, than this house, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't stop. My feet, as if they had a life of their own, led me back toward the door I had opened. The flashlight, now flickering weakly, barely illuminated the narrow corridor. I felt my pulse beating so loudly that I thought someone or something could hear it. There was no way this was normal. Nothing I was experiencing at that moment could be explained logically. Everything seemed wrapped in a layer of palpable darkness, as if the house itself were alive, watching me with invisible eyes. The air was heavy, almost tasting of the dampness of the walls, and the smell of old earth seeped into every breath I took. I felt trapped, but I couldn't stop moving forward. The feeling of being watched intensified, and once again, I heard the whisper, this time clearer, as if someone were right behind me, breathing down my neck. "Don't go on," the voice whispered, but my body refused to listen. I stopped for a moment, staring at the door that had led me into this horrible maze of shadows. It was as if every inch of my being was screaming for me to turn away, to leave this place. But something pushed me to continue. Something deep in my mind knew that this mystery, this sense of danger, would only resolve itself when I reached the end. The room was now in sight. The door, which had once seemed like a simple entry to a forgotten space, was now a barrier, a warning of what was to come. The air around the door appeared distorted, as if time itself was stretching and twisting. The scene cast strange shadows on the walls, figures that danced and elongated with every small movement. Then the door opened on its own. The sound of the creaky wood turning filled the space with a strange resonance, as if the house itself were breathing. A cold so intense, far colder than what I had already felt, began to envelop me, and a shiver ran down my spine. I saw something in the center of the room, an object covered with a cloth that seemed to be soaked with the same dust and moisture as the walls. My hand trembled as I approached. Each step was harder than the last, but something inside me told me I had to find out what was under that cloth. The whispering grew louder, but this time it wasn't just a warning. Don't do it. You're going to unleash something you can't control. With a slow motion, I pulled back the cloth. What I found under it paralyzed me. It was a mirror, or what had once been a mirror. The weathered wooden frame was adorned with symbols I didn't recognize, deeply etched into the surface. The glass, or what was left of it, was shattered, but not in the way a mirror breaks upon impact. It was as if the surface itself had cracked from within, creating a series of fine lines that formed an unsettling pattern, as if something was trapped inside. Suddenly, the room filled with a muffled sound, like a distant whisper, but growing clearer until the words began to form a coherent phrase. You will see everything. A tremor ran through my body. The air grew even thicker, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to give way. My breathing quickened. I didn't understand what was happening, but something told me it was already too late to turn back. I was too close to something, to a truth, to a force I couldn't comprehend. At that moment, the fragments of the mirror began to move, as if an invisible force were manipulating them. Cracks started to form in the glass, spreading toward the center, where a dark figure began to emerge, like a solid shadow. I couldn't see it clearly, but the feeling of terror emanating from it was palpable. The air became laden with unbearable pressure, and I felt as though my whole being was being sucked into the void forming in the reflection. A figure, like an inverted reflection of myself, peeked through the broken mirror, but it wasn't me. There was something strange in its eyes, something hollow and deep, that stared at me as if it were looking right through me, straight into my soul. Its face, distorted and dark, began to smile in an unsettling way. I told you, it whispered, and its voice was the same as I had heard before. The one that seemed to come from everywhere. You've unleashed it. Now you won't escape. My heart was racing so fast I thought I was going to faint. The air was growing denser, and a low, rumbling sound began to fill the room. It was like a constant whisper turning into distorted screams. I looked back, at the door, but it was no longer there. All that remained before me was that figure, that presence twisting and distorting, blurring the line between the real and the unreal. The darkness surrounded me. The air was no longer just cold. It was thick, sticky, as if the very atmosphere had turned into a tangible entity, a presence that was crushing me. My lungs struggled to fill with air, but each breath seemed harder than the last. The reflection in the mirror, that distorted figure of myself, kept staring at me, and every time I tried to look away, something inside me forced me to look at it, as if it were the only thing I could understand in that moment. The figure began to move slowly, as if it were aware of its own nature. Its empty, lifeless eyes never stopped staring at me, but somehow I felt there was something else inside it, something evil. The distance between us was shrinking as the space in the room seemed to expand, distorting, as if reality itself were bending around it. "What are you?" My voice trembled more from fear than from the question itself. The figure smiled again, a macabre smile that twisted its face. "I am what you have brought," it replied, its voice echoing in every corner of the room. "I am what everyone fears to see, what no one wants to remember." The room, which until that moment had been cold and dark, began to fill with unbearable pressure. The walls seemed to crumble, and the floor I had once walked on normally now wrinkled, twisting as if it were a crumpled sheet. Each crack in the floor, each crack in the walls, emitted a muffled whisper, incomprehensible words that made me feel as if my very mind were being ripped from my body. The figure in the mirror began to gesture. Its mouth moved unnaturally, as if it were speaking a language that didn't belong to this world. The sounds were piercing, and the floor beneath my feet began to tremble. The image, which had been distant at first, now seemed to be right in front of me, occupying the same space my body took up. I couldn't move. My legs were nailed to the floor, my body paralyzed by terror. All I could do was look at that figure, that inverted reflection of me, watching me as if it were a spectator of my own death. "You are trapped," the figure said, its empty eyes filling with something else, something worse than emptiness. "You are trapped in your own horror. There is no escape." Suddenly, the mirror began to vibrate. The broken glass that covered it began to move as if it had a life of its own. The room filled with a deafening noise, a roar coming from all directions, as if the house itself were screaming. The mirror cracked even further, but it didn't break entirely. Instead, a crack appeared in the center, and through it, a shadow began to emerge. The shadow had no form, but it had an overwhelming presence. It was as if it were part of the same darkness that surrounded me, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Its shape was undefined, but I felt its weight, and in that instant I knew that what I was seeing was not just a reflection, but something much bigger, something that had been lurking in the shadows of my mind all this time. "What have you done?" the figure asked, its voice booming through the house. The crack in the mirror expanded, and the shadow began to slide into the room, emerging from the surface of the glass as if it were a dark liquid. Somehow I knew it wasn't something physical, it wasn't something I could touch, but it was something that was absorbing me. Reality began to crumble before my eyes. The floor, which had once been solid, now seemed to disintegrate. Everything around me began to spin as if it were a vortex, pulling me toward the center of the darkness. The objects in the room vanished, fading into a whirlwind of shadows. The mirror, the figure, the crack, everything started to merge into a thick mist. In my mind, something resonated powerfully. A voice I couldn't identify, but that seemed familiar, whispered in my ear, "The end is near. You've unleashed it." And in that moment, I knew my only option was to face what I had freed. I didn't know if I would survive. I didn't know if what was happening was even real, but I couldn't give up. No, not while that figure was watching me. No, not while the darkness devoured me. The house was collapsing around me, and as I ventured deeper into the darkness, I didn't know if I was being absorbed by madness or something much deeper. Something that should have never been awakened. Thank you for listening to our stories until the end. Now, feel free to leave your like and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next episodes.